Philadelphia, get ready to be inspired. If you need help finding the light in the darkness, don't touch that dial. Let's navigate life through the lens of hope with Scotty P. Inspirational speaker Scotty P speaks the importance of mental health in society and encourages techniques to overcome the everyday mental health obstacles that hold us back in life. It's not just inspiration, it's Scotty P Inspiration.
Good evening, Philadelphia and the surrounding counties, and everybody nationwide who is tuning in via Spotify, www.dbam.com, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us today on another episode of the Scotty P Inspiration Show. Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Prendergast, aka your host, Scotty P, and I'm so excited that you've joined us today. I think that you're really going to be able to take some positives away, and after this, you'll be able to just a little bit more navigate your life through the lens of hope, because that's what we're trying to do here, okay? So thank you so much again. Happy Friday to everybody. You made it to the weekend, and right before you start the weekend, we're going to kick it off with a little bit of inspiration, a little mindfulness, and making sure that you're taking care of your mental health by listening to the show today. And I really am excited for the topic that we have, okay, everybody? So if you're new to the show, like I said, my name is Scott Prendergast, Scotty P. I am your host. If you want to watch previous episodes, you could go on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, www.dbam.com. You could search the Scotty P Inspiration Show, and you can see all the past episodes, including this one. And YouTube, it is Scotty P Inspiration. You search that, you'll be able to watch the episodes as well. All right, everybody. I'm really excited for this topic today because I think this is something that so many of us know we need to work on, but don't really know how to do it. So I'm excited to dive into this topic today. Now, as you know, I like to start with a quote. I think it's a good idea to kind of get things rolling, get things going, gets the juices flowing. So we're going to start with a quote today, and then we will take it from there. Well, let's go. All right. Quote is as follows. Here we go. To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Ooh, I'm going to say that again. To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Wow. Talk about a powerful quote. It is by somebody named Chrissy Jamie. So shout out to whoever you are. I like that quote. It's fantastic. This quote is just, I think it speaks volumes to what we're all really trying to do in our lives. And today, the show, I want to talk about vulnerability and how we can become more vulnerable, the bonuses of becoming more vulnerable, and also kind of debunk some of these myths that everyone says by, oh, you can't be vulnerable, you're going to get hurt. Well, I want to talk about that today because I think this is something that we're all dealing with in our lives. Either we're being vulnerable and we've been hurt because of it, or we want to be vulnerable but we don't know how. Whatever it is, this is something that all of us deal with, and I'm really excited to talk about it today. Now, to kind of dive into it to get things started, let's just state the obvious fact. Vulnerability is something that we all fear, right? We all fear this because when we think of being vulnerable, we think of letting somebody in, kind of like letting our guard down and letting that person in, and we assume that that person's going to take advantage of us. We assume that that person's going to hurt us, that they're going to do harm to us, whether it's emotionally, physically, spiritually, whatever. We assume that that's going to happen. Why do we assume that? Well, because let's be honest, in life, a lot of times, this is something that has proven to be true, right? You become vulnerable and then somebody takes your heart or somebody takes your situation and just uses it against you or breaks it in half, right? And that's such a difficult thing. And I think as a response to this, generally society has this idea that, okay, I'm going to shut everybody out, I'm going to shut everything out, and I'm not going to let anybody or anything in, so then that way I won't be hurt. But I think what's important to understand is that when we wall people off, you know what else we're doing? We're walling ourselves in. And vulnerability is probably the one thing that helps us to connect with other people the most. And this show today, we're going to really work on how we can become more vulnerable. And we're going to get to that later in the show. But we're also going to talk about how we can move past those past hurts that occurred when we were vulnerable so that we can move through that, right? Because it is something to fear. It is something that is valid to feel that way, right? So if you're listening right now and you're like, okay, Scott, I like this idea, but I can't get over my fear of being vulnerable because of something that happened 5 years ago. I totally understand that. And what you need to know is that, hey, that fear, that pain is valid, but what's the next step that we're going to do about it? What's this next step that we're going to take, right? So let's kind of dive into the nitty gritty here a little bit. Because in this show, I love it to just be able to take something right away and add it to your life so you can get the most out of this 30 minutes. vulnerability in its most basic sense, essentially, it means taking a chance, right? When you're vulnerable, that means you're taking a chance. When you take a chance in life, there is always a possibility of failure, okay? And that possibility of failure, that means battling with the fear of inadequacy. Think about that. Because anytime there's a chance for something to fail, we always assume, well, if I fail, that means I'm inadequate. Well, if this doesn't work, that means I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I will never be that because I failed, so I'm not enough. And that's that cycle that I think a lot of times we fall into. That's why so many of us don't become vulnerable and don't take chances, because we don't want that failure and we don't want to feel inadequate. And that's totally valid. And that's something I've dealt with for years. But one of the things that I think is super important to learn from this is that there's always going to be a possibility of failure. But with every failure, as I've talked about, there is an opportunity that is given birth right there. There is a new opportunity to learn something, right? And so if you said, hey, Scott, I've tried being vulnerable before and it blew up in my face and I felt so inadequate for like 10 years, I would first empathize with you and say, I'm sorry that happened to you. But I would also say, look, if you allow that situation to instead be something that didn't hold you back, but rather something that could change your viewpoint, all of a sudden that vulnerability can really be a superpower. Just like that quote said, it can be our greatest strength. Because vulnerability it's how we connect with each other. It's how humans build bonds. It's how you build connections. That's how you build relationships. That's how you learn to love. And if we can't be vulnerable, we're not going to truly experience those things in their most pure form. We might get glimpses of it, but we won't get the whole thing. But, that's the thing, is that letting go and trying something like that, again, goes back to that cycle, that fear of inadequacy. So my question and your question would probably be, okay, Scott, well, what do I do about that feeling of inadequacy? How do I fight back against that so I can be vulnerable, put myself out there, take a chance without being paralyzed by that feeling of inadequacy? What can I do? Well, there's a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about that later in the second segment, which I'm excited for, because that's where we really break down specific strategies that you can use. But while we're still talking about this here, what I think is really important for us is to learn to separate reality from a perceived outcome. And what I mean by that is as follows. I think sometimes we have an opportunity to be vulnerable in some way in our lives. With a person, with a relationship, with a job, with a new experience, whatever it is. We have an opportunity to be vulnerable. And we're understandably scared. And so then that one part of our brain psychs us out and says, okay, you're going to be vulnerable and this is going to happen. It's going to be terrible. This is all guaranteed going to happen. There's no way it's not going to happen, so you just can't do it. And it's this perceived outcome that we've created for ourselves, this perceived idea of what's going to happen. And I think a lot of times what happens is this perceived idea we confuse with reality in a way. So then we end up just not doing anything, not letting our walls down, not allowing that vulnerability to show because of that perceived that perceived idea that has now become our reality. So instead, one of the things I think is super important when it comes to being vulnerable is when you have that chance to do it, you have to separate, okay, this voice over here, this voice is telling me it's going to be a failure. This voice is telling me all these things that's going to happen. Acknowledge that. You don't want to suppress it. Acknowledge that that's there. Acknowledge the fear, yes. But also know that that is something that you perceive. It is not an absolute given or guarantee. So if it's not a given or guarantee, that means it's not 100% going to happen. And we need to remember that, because if we try to be vulnerable with our mind already made up that it won't work, chances are you really know it's not going to work, because we're going to look for any way to make it not work to back up that evidence that we've told ourselves in our mind, right? That's the power of what you think connected to what you feel, connected to what you do. Thoughts, feelings, and actions are all connected, right? So we've got to make sure that we're starting by putting those right thoughts in our head and separating from those perceived failures that haven't really happened. And that is so, so, so incredibly important. And I hope you, the listener, can take that from this today. So for you, the listener, because I love to make this a listener-based show, I want you to think about something right now. You don't have to have an answer. Just think about it, because we're going to come back to it later. I want you to think about the last time that you were truly, genuinely vulnerable in your life. Think about the last time you were. I'm talking genuinely vulnerable. Okay? I want you to think about it. And I want you to think about what the outcome was. Think about it. Think about the last time you were vulnerable and what that outcome was. Now, I want you to hold on to that. Okay, I want you to put that in your back pocket. And now as you're thinking about what that outcome was, ask yourself this. Does that outcome affect my current view on being vulnerable now? Am I allowing what happened in that outcome, whatever it was, to affect my current views towards vulnerability? I.e., did you get hurt? Did it really not go well for you? And now you just refuse to be vulnerable. And I want you to be honest with yourself and answer that question. If the answer is yes, and it is okay if it is. You hear me? It is okay if it is. That's why you're listening to the show. It's all right. But if it is, we have to first acknowledge that. We have to understand that. We have to acknowledge that. We have to make note of that so that we can learn to say, okay, I got to move through this now. Because if we don't, acknowledge that, what's going to happen is we're never really going to open the doors to vulnerability ever because we got this issue blocking it. And that issue is that fear because of what we went through before. All right? So you, the listener, wants you to do that. Think of the last time you were vulnerable. Think about what happened because of it. And think about if that result is affecting your current view towards it as well. Hold on to that. We're going to think about that. And we're going to talk about it later a little bit, okay? So last thing before we go to break, we got a few more minutes left here real quick. I want you, the listener, to start thinking about it like this because this is something that's helped me tremendously in my life and a lot of people that I've worked with and spoken with. I think of it that vulnerability is the key that really opens the door to the connections in our lives. It is. We have these doors, these different connections, and we're trying to open them and trying to jiggle the handles like, bruh, ain't none of these working. But then all of a sudden, when we're vulnerable, we now have that key to put it in there, open it, and see what's inside. Now, that vulnerability could be in the sense of just taking a chance and starting a new business or doing a career change or going up to somebody, asking somebody out. It could be telling the person you're already with how much they mean to you. It could be anything. I want you, the listener, to decide what that area is. But that key is vulnerability. And we need to use that key in order to open that door for those opportunities of connection in our lives. And when we connect, whoa, that's when big things happen. You know, for anyone who started a business, I can tell you with my own business, things didn't start happening until I started being vulnerable and connecting with people. Started taking a chance, saying, hey, this might not work, but I'm going to try it. And guess what? Sometimes it didn't work, but sometimes it did. And it was because of that vulnerability, that key, that I was able to open those doors to connections that led to more things. So it doesn't just have to be in the business world. It can be in relationships. It can be trying to find a relationship or a relationship you've been in for 25 years, right? Vulnerability is that key that's going to bring that connection into your life. And once that connection comes into your life, which whatever the aspect is, oh man, that's when special things happen. Special things in work, special things in leisure, special things in relationships. It starts with that, okay? So view it that way. And if you start viewing vulnerability as a key, it's no longer going to have this heavy kind of stigma associated with it saying, oh, that's soft and weak, but rather it's going to look like, oh, wow, vulnerability, that's something that's essential. I need to do this rather than, oh, well, maybe I want to do that. No, I need to do this to get that connection that is so incredibly important, everyone, okay? So stay with us, everybody. We got so much more coming up in the second part here. We're going to dive a little bit deeper because that's what we do. I'm really excited. I love this topic. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back at these quick commercial breaks.
Hey everyone, Eric Katz here, the owner of Katz Dogs Canine. Are you working from home and need to get your dog out running around for the day? Will you be traveling this summer and looking for a place to board your pup? Is your dog looking a little shaggy and need a haircut or bath? Are you looking forward to walking around and enjoying this beautiful weather, but you can't because your dog's pulling like a freight train? Well, you're in luck. We are a one-stop shop that focuses on daycare, boarding, grooming, and training. We are located at 35 Middle Road, Kirkcaldy, PA, on 10 beautiful acres. You can check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Katz Dogs Canine or our website, katzdogscanine.com. Our phone number is 855-KATZ-DOG, 855-528-9364.
What's going on, everyone? This is Scott Prendergast here, aka Scotty P. Real quick, I want to talk to you about my business. It's called Scotty P Inspiration. And what I am is I'm an inspirational speaker, and I want to help others navigate life through the lens of hope. Now, I do this through speaking engagements, but also one-on-one life coaching. So if you're interested in booking me or doing some of that coaching, let me know. Check me out at www.scottypinspiration.com or check out my Instagram at scottyp_inspo. Find Yourself Boxes was created to foster the connection between a person and those in life who may be working through mental health challenges by providing curated and customizable boxes filled with research-backed wellness products that promote healing. Coupling personal experience with professional mental health guidance, Find Yourself Boxes meets people where they are on their journey. Wellness doesn't look the same for every person, and these products are packaged together to touch various aspects of our wellness spectrum. Find your healing with Find Yourself Boxes at findyourselfboxes.com, and you can get 20% off your first purchase. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Scotty P Inspiration Show. Thanks for sticking with us here after the commercial breaks. I'm so thankful you're here and ready for the second part of the show. Now, if you are just joining us, just tuning in right now, we are talking about vulnerability today. Ooh. Something that we all need to work on, something that we are talking about in depth, and we're giving you some strategies. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Now, real quick, if you want to watch previous episodes, let's just remember, you can go on Spotify, search Scotty P Inspiration Show. Go on Apple Podcasts, search it. You could go on www.dbam.com and search it. And you can go on my YouTube channel, which is Scotty P Inspiration. You can watch previous episodes that way. So everybody, back to it. We're diving into it. We're talking about vulnerability today. We're doing some things, getting the weekend started. Phillies are playing tonight. What's going on? We about to win this World Series. Houston, sit down. It's Phillies' time to stand up. Okay, so I'm excited. We got one half of the show left to do. Let's do it. Let's run with it. Okay, so on the topic of vulnerability, I had somebody ask me this once, and I love this question. They said, how do you take a step towards being vulnerable without letting that fear completely paralyze you? And I talked about this before the break too. So what do we do? How do we do this? Because it sounds great. Like, yeah, I want to be more vulnerable. That's my New Year's goal, right? Yeah, I'm going to do it. But how do you do it? Especially when the thought of doing it makes you tremble in fear. What do you do? How do you do it? Tell me, Scotty P, what's the answer? Well, there is no one answer. But I will say this. It starts with little steps. Little things. Little ways that you can take one step at a time to start to train your brain that, hey, look, being vulnerable isn't so bad. And what that looks like is different for everybody, but it might look like this. It might look like, let's say you're in school still. It might look like wearing a shirt that means a lot to you. When you know that other people might think it's weird, and you say, you know what? I'm going to do it anyways. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to put my interests out here for other people to see. That is so simple, right? But that is being vulnerable because you're wearing a shirt that represents something that maybe you really like and maybe not everyone else will. And you don't know what the reaction was going to be, but you're going to do it anyways. That's being vulnerable. That is a great first step. As simple as that is a great first step towards learning to work through your vulnerability, allow it, own it, do it, and realize, hey, you know what? I was vulnerable and I'm still here. I made it. I'm still good. Right? And we want to build on more experiences like that. Add that to our collection of experiences, to the many bricks in our life's house, so that then when we get to a point where we want to be vulnerable with something big, like in a relationship or in a job or in a connection, we're able to do it because we've practiced, because we've taken little steps forward with being vulnerable with less important things. But just because they're less important doesn't mean that the lesson isn't just as good. Right? So sometimes I think a lot of people will say, well, I want this huge big fix. Scott, tell me how I can go from being never wanting to be vulnerable to tomorrow being able to be vulnerable in every single way and be the most vulnerable person east of the Mississippi, west of the Nile, north of the equator, and south of Santa's workshop. Well, like, bro, hold on a second here. We don't go 0 to 100 like that. We take little steps. We celebrate little victories each day, little progressions. That's what this stuff's about. So for you, the listener, doesn't have to be my t-shirt example. It could be anything. But I challenge you this week, before you listen to next week's show, find a way to be a little bit vulnerable in your life. Take that little step forward and just see how it makes you feel. Take that little step of vulnerability and allow it to add to your life's experience and hold on to it and remember that so that you can start building on it, okay? So I think that's really a great first step towards being vulnerable and working through that paralyzation that comes with sometimes feeling that way, all right? Now, as we dive a little bit deeper here and we're rolling on here, a question that I can hear people saying right now, not literally, but I can imagine in their cars or wherever they're listening to, is saying, okay, Scott, this sounds all fine and dandy and great, but what do you do when you've tried being vulnerable, but worst case scenario happened and you got hurt extremely bad and you felt devastated? What do you do then, Scott? Well, that is a great question. because the fact of the matter is that there are many people, most of us in this life, who will be vulnerable at some point, and it will backfire on us, and it will hurt us, and someone may take advantage. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I don't do that on the Scotty P Inspiration Show. That might happen. But I will tell you this. Remember that there is far too much to be gained from being vulnerable to allow a few past disappointments to ruin a future breakthrough. You hear me when I say that? I'm going to say it again in case you didn't. Remember that there is far too much to be gained by being vulnerable to allow a few disappointments that you've had in the past to ruin a potential breakthrough in your life. Let that sink in, listeners. Let it sink in a little bit more. Okay, now we're going to talk about it again, okay? Look, there is no guarantee that by being vulnerable and saying, well, Scotty P told me to be vulnerable, that all of a sudden the clouds are going to part and everything's going to go your way. No, but there will be a time in your life where you will have a decision to make. Either be vulnerable or don't. And the consequence of that decision could impact you in a fantastic or a very negative way. And I hope that you choose to be vulnerable. Because who knows, you may get in a relationship where somebody really likes you, but you're not being vulnerable and they don't want to stay with you because they feel like that you're holding something back from them. Or you may get in a position where your life, where you're at this job and everybody's connecting real well, but you feel like you're not connecting because you're not being vulnerable and engaging in that type of way. And then who knows, maybe you get passed up on a promotion, right? So we have to understand that, yes, hurt is potential. It is possible. It may happen. There's a good chance it will, but there's far too much to be gained in your life to allow that fear of hurt to hold you back from trying something that's going to lead to an amazing breakthrough and amazing things. Hear me when I say that, everybody. Please. So we build on those little aspects, those little ways of being vulnerable. Like I said before, we start building on that. We keep getting in the lab. We go to work. We go to work and say, hey, I'm going to start working on myself to be vulnerable. Imagine like yourself, you're in the gym. You're just doing set after set after set. You're getting used to it. You're going through it. But you're building those experiences. You're allowing yourself to have that feeling of vulnerability. So when that big time comes, and it will, it's not if, it's when. And when it does, by you having all those past experience with vulnerability and those little things to build up to it, you'll be able to make that right decision to be vulnerable and allow yourself to get the glory, or not glory, that's a cheesy word, to get the benefits that come with it. And that's not something I want you to miss out on, because that's the really great stuff in life, in whatever the realm is, whether it's, again, work, school, finances, relationship, whatever. Okay, so I hope that's something you can really take from this, everybody. I really, really want you to hear me on that. But look, as we've been talking about vulnerability all day today, I think what's important to understand is that everything we've been talking about, it takes time. Everything that I talk about on the Scotty P Inspiration Show, it takes time. That is one of my biggest things that I talk about, is recognizing that these things take time. None of this is an overnight fix. So if you're looking for a microwave type thing where you put it in and 2 seconds later you're like, oh, I got everything figured out, then you might as well turn the show off right now. Because that's not how this works. That's not how this life works. We want it to work that way. Social media tries to tell us that that's the way it should be. But the fact of the matter is, anything good and worthy takes time, effort, and failures, and recoveries from those failures, and repeated attempts to truly get something good out of it. All right? And vulnerability is no different. No different. And, one of the things that I've found is I've talked to different people in my life who I've spoken and worked with, and sometimes people will wear I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. They'll wear vulnerability on them, so to speak, saying, well, I was vulnerable once, and, well, it's too late for me. I can't do anything now because I was hurt so bad. I'll never be able to get past it. Well, you need to stop that. And you need to take that off, and we need to understand something. Okay, I'm going to be real with everybody here, because I don't want to see people going through their lives anymore saying, woe is me, this happened. Look, you got to own that and say, yeah, this happened to me. Yeah, it sucked. Yeah, it wasn't fun. Yeah, I took an L, man. It hurt bad, but that is one brick in the story, in the house of my life. That is one thing that happened to me. That doesn't define me. It is part of me, yes, but it does not define me. You are not defined by your past failed vulnerability aspects. Not defined by that. So let's stop defining ourselves by that. Instead, let's say, hey, it didn't go great. I didn't love it, but I'm still here and I'm ready to do it again because I'm ready to reap those benefits that will come with that. But you're never going to get that until we first make that attempt, right? And so for you, the listener today, I want you to really, really hone in on that. Give yourself time. I'm not saying tomorrow you're going to be like, I'm going to be like Scott and just be vulnerable in every aspect. No. I also have a job that forces me to be vulnerable and has for the past 5 years. So I've gotten used to it and I've learned. But when I first started, was I this vulnerable? Nope. But I built on it. And I gave myself that time to build on it. And I want you to give yourself that time as well and to be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself and be kind to those who do choose to be vulnerable. And that's another thing that I want to say is sometimes I think when we experience pain in our lives, I know this happens, we'll experience pain. And we think no one else knows what that feels like. So then we go on a mission to make somebody else feel the same way that we felt so that our pain can be validated. So we may have been vulnerable at one time. It hurt us so bad. So then someone else comes into our lives where they try to be vulnerable with us. And then we hurt them almost subconsciously because we want them to feel the same. And where does that get us? Now we just got two people who now have hurt each other. Right? So today, everybody, as we wrap up the show here, we got about a minute and a half left. I want to leave you with this. Everything that we've talked about today with vulnerability is so important. Give it time, everything that I've said. But above else, just remember that vulnerability is a strength. Just like that quote said, right? To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Don't you dare for a second let anybody tell you that being vulnerable is a weakness. It's the opposite. It's easy to hide everything inside. It's easy to put on a mask every day. It's a lot harder to let your true reality show for other people to see. And although it's a lot harder to do that, the benefits and the beauty that come from that cannot be surpassed. That's when we really start living life, when we allow that vulnerability in and allow other people to see that and allow other people in. We can't live this life pushing everybody else away because then we're going to only make ourselves more lonely. So today I want to challenge you, allow somebody into your life. You'll never know how that person might be able to help you or change you or makes a difference in your world. And also be the person that allows somebody else to be vulnerable, right? And understand that everyone's fighting that battle and it's tough and it's dirty and it's not always a fun time and it's hard. Empathize with that person and say, hey, you know what? It's okay. You can let me in. That vulnerability, it's a strength. Remember that, everybody. And I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for tuning in again to another episode. Go Phillies. Houston, sit down. It's time for Philly to stand up. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day. This is Scotty P signing off.